Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have back with us Paul Fokken, and we are going to be discussing today 401k lawsuits and fines. Paul, welcome back to the program.
Hey, it's a pleasure, Mike. Good morning.
Good morning. So, I think this is kind of an interesting topic because I think a lot of times, like we've been mentioning in this series, employees just check the box and go, here's my 401k, and I guess it's going to do what it needs to do, but there's a lot more to it than that. And I think employers check the box figuratively and go, okay, we're offering a 401k, and it's just going to be great. But there's some landmines that could be happening. So bring us up to speed on lawsuits and fines, and then what can be done about it.
Sure, Mike, be happy to. Yeah, we're seeing an increasing number of lawsuits and fines in the 401k arena. As I mentioned, in the past that I subscribed to some Google alert systems, and you're seeing 401k lawsuits, in all kinds of different sizes of plans. Sometimes you think, they only go after those big, huge, multi-million-dollar type plans, but it isn't necessarily the case. And you'd be amazed at the number, that are popping up on my list. Even this week, I think I've had one about every day, and you'll see suits on excessive fees, improper investment menus and fines, prohibited transactions. There's some certain people, if that you probably shouldn't hire is running your 401k, those kinds of things, late fees, or even an incomplete Form 5500, which 401k, plans, they need to file those with the government. So even just one upon, we were reviewing a copy of the letter from the IRS, and one small business was fined just $150,000 for filing an incomplete or late Form 5500. So it's like it's not just the lawsuits too. The DLL is out there too, and they're looking for improprieties if something happens and so forth. And just some of the fines, it goes anywhere from a retirement or a healthcare system, was fined for about 1.75, or they received a class settlement. It might not be all finished yet, but at least, what it's saying is, you are getting sued.
Yeah.
And the employees claim their retirement plan was filled with expensive, actively managed investment funds that charged excessive fees. And we'll talk about that a little bit, maybe some ways you might be able to mitigate that. And then, a technology company, again, was sued, and defendants alleged not only failed to prudently manage the plan investments, but failed to control the cost of the plan. So again, we'll talk about that prudent expert too. That's kind of a buzzword in the ERISA world. And then there was an auto parts store too that had a suit claiming they charged excessive record-keeping fees and offered expensive investment options. So those are just to name a few, and most of those just came through my desk this week, or the past 2 weeks. So
when you hear things like that, and you hear fines and lawsuits, that's being levied against the business owner, not the 401k plan itself. And the reason I'm wanting to clarify that is all of those things you're mentioning, like excessive this or failure to do, how many of those things, like did the business owner themselves push a button and say, we're going to charge more fees in this 401k? Probably not. So These are things that are out of the control of the business owner because they think and assume that the 401k is just doing what it needs to do. But lo and behold, there's some toxic things going on in there, and then here pops up a fine or a lawsuit, and it's things that they're not doing. It's because they're stepping in front of the responsibility of the plan, right?
Yep, and if your name is on that 5500, or you're a plan administrator or have some responsibility for that plan, you probably fall under that fiduciary responsibility. And I think most business owners don't really realize that. And even, one of those suits was they sued the company, they sued the board of directors, and anybody else that was on the retirement plan committee.
Wow.
So you can be personally liable too. And that's what I don't think people understand. If they're looking at the 5500 and you talk to them, it's like, do you know you're personally liable for what happens with this plan?
Well, and the interesting thing is that I'm sure that's pretty obscure, but it's happened. But if you as an employee are nominated or told, oh, you're going to be on this committee, I'll bet you that they're on all kinds of committees throughout their career, and they're like, oh, I'm just some other meeting got to sit in on. But in reality, they don't have the protections that a business owner may have with corporation, LLC, subcorp, the SC, and all that. Whereas the employee might have a little bit more exposure than the business owner if something happens. And we don't need to get into the weeds there, but I'm just saying that there's these little cracks in it that people don't realize, and being able to recognize that this kind of stuff happens, it's eye-opening, I feel.
Yeah, and I mean, it's crazy that it's happening, but it's like, wow, and you just kind of learn about that, and it's like, whoa, what are you going to do? Or if I'm the owner, is like, what, I don't want all this responsibilities or anything out there I can do. And it kind of leads in, to, hey, there's some solutions out there that you can look at, or some options for you.
And I know you guys have some options and solutions, but it makes me wonder too, is there anything that a business owner hearing this would be able to do to say, well, I'll just increase my liability insurance, or I'll get an umbrella policy that would cover things like that. And if that even exists, that would probably be highly expensive, and it really wouldn't fix the problem. It's kind of like, oh, I've got an artery in my arm that's severed. I'll just use a Band-Aid. No, we need to fix the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's the kind of way we see it is, why not try to shift some of that liability too?
Yeah.
Maybe not take on more liability insurance, but hey, if we could shift that, why not do that and put the administration oversight of the plan into experts?
Yes,
or they have expertise in that area.
Yeah, I think that that word fiduciary we've talked about before. The business owner really doesn't fully understand the responsibility of that, because they would hear the definition and go, fiduciary means you must do what's best for your employees at all times, in all ways, that kind of a feel, that overview. But the downside of that is, if and when something like some of these things come up, then they come after you because you've stepped in the gap there and said, I'm the fiduciary. Well, maybe you didn't know that.
Yeah. And that's what's going to be the buzzword now, is this fiduciary governance, and people don't, necessarily want to talk about that. Oh, I'm not going to get sued. This isn't going to happen. But I just laid out 3 different examples and 4 with a fine of where, something could happen. And that's why we think there's another option to have what's called a multiple employer plan, MEP for short, or an open MEP.
So what does that look like? What would that? So like, sure. Here's an employer A that has a 401k, and they hear this and they go, okay, what is a MEP? What's a multiple employer plan, and what would that look like in the company?
Yeah, sure. Open MEPs are basically, they're qualified 401k retirement plans, and they permit multiple unaffiliated employers to opt in to a retirement plan. So the plan is sponsored by an outside entity that bears that responsibility, like I said, for administering the plan. And the only commonality that the participating employers have is just providing retirement benefits to their employees. Now, in the past, MEP plans used to say you got to have some commonality, like we got to have all construction companies in this plan. But, I think the powers that be kind of realize that, and it doesn't really make sense. If it's just people want retirement, benefits, then let's just have them do that. And the nice thing about our 401k maneuver MEP, it's fully integrated, yet it's fully customizable, turnkey plan that's designed to reduce employer and personal fiduciary liability. And the other thing is they can be great for startups too, like, and there's buzzes out there like states and whatnot are looking at federal that are saying, hey, if you have so many employees, you need to have a 401k or some type of retirement plan. And in addition, if you might have an existing simple plan or SEP, that's why we picked that out, because it's simple. But maybe there's some advantages with a 401k where you could put more money in, your employees know they have, and you have that other extra, coverage with the liability too. And we've seen as plans as small as one employee, that just kind of want that 401k instead of the other. And I think business owners, either if you don't have a plan or if you do have one of the other ones, it's still worth taking a look like today, say, maybe a 401k is the way to go now.
Yeah. And so that right there, you remember back in school when you were doing fractions and you would have these two fractions and you would cross out the 2 and the 4 and put in 1 and a 2, and so you're like, okay, this replaces this. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, here's this 401k traditional plan that could have these responsibilities and fiduciary and lawsuits fine. So if an employer says, wow, I want to eliminate that or reduce that with this multiple employer plan. Okay, good. So that reduces and replaces that risk factor there. What other benefits? Is there some cost savings maybe that, in a traditional 401k, it's costing the employer this, but our plan also saves. Is there other savings and benefits too?
Yeah, and it could be. It just depends. But, sometimes when you look at economies of scale, then the cost can come down. Yeah. And the other thing to think about is depending on the number of employees that you have, whether you need to have an audit or not have an audit too. So there's, some things that can be saved there. But again, if maybe it costs a little bit more, but your plan is, the performance is there, the service issues are, if it's excelling as an efficient plan, then maybe a little bit more cost is worth it too. So it just kind of depends. But the interesting thing, Mike, according to Tom Bick from Fiduciary Wise, and he's our the plan administrator, for the ones that we work with, and he was talking to ERISA attorneys, and some of them think that 50% of all assets in ERISA 401k plans will be MEPs maybe within the next 5 years. So, wow. Pretty bold statement, but it's something like, hey, maybe if I want to. Be there, maybe be on the ahead of the game, take a look. And, like I said, the nice thing is plan reps can delegate virtually all their personal liability away to other named fiduciaries in the plan. So subsequently, a major responsibilities, and that's the other thing besides just shifting the liability, you're taking away 20 or more responsibilities you have as a business owner and getting it down to about 4 or 5 where you just got to, monitor the fiduciaries, make sure they're doing their job because you hired them, provide the plan information, make your contributions, deposits timely, and maintain a adequate fidelity bond, which protects you, against fraud and so forth.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, the normal things that you'd expect anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And in fact, the quote that you mentioned about 50% of all 401ks may be these MEPs in the future, that's just someone like almost like an economist looking ahead going, hey, looking in the recent past and looking at what should happen in the future, here's the telltale signs, here's the trends, here's where the trend is going. And whether it's not 50, maybe it's 38, but the point is it's a major percentage is heading in that direction. And that's something to take notice of, I would suspect.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of getting at, too, where I think it's important because the other term out there is prudent expert, and kind of DOL and ERISA kind of looks at that. If you're not the expert, then you may not want that responsibility for your plan. So I'll give you an example, Mike. The DOL just happens to come in, snooping around your office, and asks to see copies of your or an owner to see your copies of 408B2 and 404 forms, and you reply, what are those? What do you think the DOL is going to say as far as you being a prudent expert?
Yeah.
And, and it's just a simple, they're just disclosure fees that the plan. Yeah, they're basically simple disclosure fees that each provider of the plan has to give the employer. And then the other forms are basically just investment reports that, you need to give to your employees. But again, they might, not know that. They just sign the plan and whatever. And then the other thing they might say, well, the other processes, with your meeting minutes, justifying benchmarking fees. I mean, out there now they're saying, hey, you should benchmark your plans and your fees every 1 or 2 years. And, how many people are doing that just to see, hey, are the investments and the fees and services that we got, providing what they should be providing and according to ERISA and some of the, latest guidelines that are coming out. And so just replying, hey, my advisor takes care of that may not meet that prudent expert rule for fiduciary that you signed or that you're a fiduciary for that plan.
Yeah, that benchmarking is a great point, because it's like, we've got a great choice and selection, and we provide our employees, and our plan is we're following everything on time. But when you benchmark, that's like being proactive and going, okay, we're now checking out what other people and other plans and other companies are doing, and then we compared it to what we're doing. Okay, check. We check that box, and it looks like we're in line. But what if there was something where it's like, wow, we're way over, under, different? We need to tweak and fine tune. So that speaks a lot to being that, prudent expert.
Yep. And, while there are a number of MEP plans that are available, out there, you still got to be careful on how they're structured. So we'd like to think the structure that we have created avoids that bias and self-dealing. In fact, Allianz was, one that I just saw the other day, or noticed that they, were to pay a $12 million settlement because of self-dealing, with their own retirement plan. I mean, it's just, those types of things happen, but the idea behind it is, with fiduciary-wise, that we assign as a 402A and a 316, which basically they're responsible for the administration and the oversight of the plan. So the nice thing about that is they're not the third-party administrator, TPA for short, and I think some of the business owners will know that, the record keeper. So we use Future Benefits of America, because that's their, expertise and what they are helping other plans and other employers. And our custodian is Mid-Atlantic Trust, and they provide a platform that allows Future Benefits to access the investments for the plan, and then the investment manager, or the 338, we have Bell Rock Capital, and they are separate from us, who's 401k Maneuver. We're the advisor of the plan that provides the enrollment, the investment advice, and the education. So you can see what is nice about this. Yes, it's a turnkey, customizable plan, but everybody has a distinct piece and knows their role. There's no intermingling between. And that's why we think, that's the way you want to go. Just keep everybody separate.
Yeah, it makes me think, and I'm sure this is not a great application, but commingling of funds. When you hear that with, the IRS and your accountant, like, oh, don't put your business money in your personal account, and vice versa. Well, you want to keep everyone being focused on what they're super, super good at, then it's like you're not trying to be pretty good at something. You're being excellent and an expert in that one area, and then you bring in the expert for the next area and the next area, and then that kind of keeps everyone really focused on their highest and best use of their expertise and their contribution to the company, I would suspect.
Yeah, exactly. And then even with our 401k, MEP plan, then we can offer 401k Maneuver, that we talked about on the other podcasts, but there just gives you another additional benefit for your employees to get that advice too. So when they're getting that advice and seeing hopefully that 3% return that the research shows or more, right, they're going to be happy. So they're not going to be thinking, hey, these fees are too high, or, I'm not getting the return, or I'm not getting the service that I thought I was going to get. So that's kind of nice to have. And now we got everything in one, package for a business owner that wants to focus more on what do they want to do, grow their business, right, Mike?
Yep. It layers in the benefits where you're reducing and mitigating risks from lawsuits and fines, and keeping the experts where the experts need to be, which is not the business owner in the fiduciary sense. And then the byproduct is, hey, when the employees know they've got a dedicated person to ask questions and rebalance and make tweaks with their 401k, and lo and behold, they get a little bit of a better return than what they were getting. Wonderful. And then everything is working in tandem. So I think that's a really neat way to approach things. So super, super great points here today, Paul. What's the final thought that you would recommend employers to consider here with this, and then what's the best way they can reach out and connect with you?
Certainly, Mike. Yeah, I'd just say finally, I'll leave you with this. If you're one of the decision makers for the plan, and that could be, maybe somebody in HR that might be listening, or the owner, or whatever it is, somebody that might be responsible, and you'd like, a no-cost analysis of your plan, we can provide that analysis of your investment, the investment menu that you have, the fees, the current structure, the processes, And what you find out is many plan reps are surprised at the number of investment menu funds that do not meet our criteria, regarding efficiency. And there's a term out there again, that you might ask a prudent expert about common law trust. And if they don't know that, but basically it's guidelines from the DOL, ERISA is looking for the standalone active funds versus passive funds. And that's where some of these employees are bringing lawsuits against employers because they're saying, hey, these higher active funds that are supposed to be managed and giving this return are not giving us this return versus just a regular fund that has a lower fee. But the nice thing about us and with Bell Rock Capital is we have a method now that they've even talked to ERISA attorney, looking at it to see what active funds are efficient versus not efficient. And so if they're not efficient, they're going to be imprudent and may not be good enough if a lawsuit is, brought on. So maybe a 50% average, which is kind of failing, isn't that good. Yeah. So it only takes one happy employee with, return concerns, excessive fees, maybe service issues, or a DOL employee, because now, found out that a lot of them are working for commission. So they're looking to find something wrong with your plan, right? Did you fill that $5,500 out wrong? Was it late? And so you could see some of that costing you in the long run. So you can just contact me via phone or email. It's pmfokken@royalfundmanagement.com. And phone number is 712-321-3272. And I know business owners out there, I think, are on LinkedIn too. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, feel free to search me out there. Or you can even go to my website and set up a consultation with me too. So at www.fokkenfinancial.com.
Excellent. Well, Paul, it was a real pleasure having you back on. I just really appreciate your insights in this really critical topic. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure, Mike.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.